You are to remain here. In spirit, anyway.
How does a movie die? Is it when the critics call it tasteless, childish, and horrible? Is it when audiences are so baffled that theaters pull it from circulation after only a few weeks? By every metric of success, the film we're talking about tonight was dead on arrival. But what if a movie refuses to stay buried? What if its ghost begins to haunt a handful of rundown theaters at midnight, attracting a small congregation of disciples? This is the story of how a colossal failure didn't just survive, but achieved the impossible, becoming the longest-running theatrical release in all of film history. And now, for its 50th anniversary, we must confront the ultimate bizarre paradox of its legacy. How does a movie that is a defiant, subversive, and glorious celebration of sin, sexual fluidity, and sensual daydreams now live under the same corporate roof as Cinderella and Mickey Mouse?
Great Scott!
Yes, tonight we're telling the full story of how the Walt Disney Company became the owners of the Rocky Horror Picture Show. This isn't just the story of a cult movie. It's the story of a beautiful accident, a monster that escaped the lab and was adopted by an army of fans who refused to let it die. To celebrate its 50th anniversary, we're going to tell the entire strange and wonderful story. So, let's do the time warp again. To understand where Dr. Frankenfurter came from, you have to understand the world that built his castle. The early 1970s weren't just a hangover from the 60s. They were a strange, glitter-dusted, and deeply cynical dawn of a new era. In America, the disillusionment of the Vietnam War and the Watergate scandal hung heavy in the air. The old rules were broken, and no one knew what the new ones were. Into this void stepped glam rock. With androgynous prophets like David Bowie and Mark Bolan, it challenged every convention of masculinity with makeup, platform shoes, and unapologetic theatricality. The fight for gay liberation, sparked by the Stonewall riots just a few years earlier, was becoming a powerful social movement. At the same time, there was a deep cultural craving for the past, but not the pristine past. It was a love for the campy, low-budget B-movies Richard O'Brien would later immortalize in the film's opening song.
Michael Rennie was ill the day the earth stood still.
Creatures, aliens, giant apes, and triffids that had thrilled and terrified audiences in the 30s, 40s, and 50s were being rediscovered by a new generation. Science fiction, horror, rock and roll, and sexual expression were all colliding. The world was ready for something new, something different. It just didn't know it yet.
Such a perfect specimen of manhood. So dominant.
And in the middle of all this was Richard O'Brien, an actor and occasional stuntman who had moved from New Zealand to London to chase his dreams. In 1972, after being unceremoniously fired from a production of Jesus Christ Superstar, he found himself unemployed with a newborn son and a lot of time on his hands. To keep himself from going mad during the long winter evenings, he started writing a musical. It was a passion project, a way to mix everything he loved into one gloriously weird package. At a company Christmas party, he performed a song he had just written, science fiction double feature. The warm reception gave him the jolt of confidence he needed to continue. He cobbled together jokes, more songs, and a story, giving it working titles that were a direct homage to his beloved B-movies. They Came from Denton, which later evolved into They Came from Denton High. O'Brien showed his wonderfully bizarre creation to his friend, Australian director Jim Sharman. Sharman saw the genius in the madness. Together with a team of young creatives, including costume designer Sue Blaine, who would create the iconic ripped fishnets and corsets, and set designer Brian Thompson, the newly titled The Rocky Horror Show was born. It premiered in June 1973, not in a grand West End house, but in a tiny 63-seat experimental space above London's Royal Court Theatre. It was supposed to be a small, weird show with a limited 5-week run. Instead, it was an explosion. London audiences were electrified. The show became the hottest ticket in town, winning awards and quickly moving to larger venues like the Chelsea Classic Cinema, before settling in for a staggering 6-year run at the 500-seat Kings Road Theatre. The show's gritty, do-it-yourself aesthetic even had a direct influence on the burgeoning punk movement. A young fashion impresario named Malcolm McLaren, who would soon manage the Sex Pistols, was a regular in the audience, soaking in the rebellious energy. But the lightning in the bottle, the absolute heart of the show, was Tim Curry. O'Brien bumped into Curry, whom he knew from the London production of the musical Hair. It was a serendipitous encounter that would change cinematic history. As Dr. Frankenfurter, Curry was a force of nature, dangerous, hilarious, and impossibly charismatic. His masterstroke was the voice. After experimenting with German and American accents that felt cliché, he had a revelation on a London bus. He overheard a woman speaking with an incredibly posh, regal, upper-crust accent, and he thought, that's it, Frank is the queen. This bizarre, brilliant choice to have Frank speak like royalty created an unsettling and hilarious contrast with his leather corset and depraved behavior. It elevated the character to icon. The phenomenon couldn't be contained in Britain. American record producer Lou Adler saw the show and immediately bought the U.S. rights. It opened at his famous Roxy Theater in Los Angeles, and once again it was a smash hit, attracting a nightly who's who of Hollywood royalty. The stage was set. The monster was a certified hit. Hollywood, with its promise of cinematic immortality, came knocking. With the Rocky Horror Show being a certified sensation on stage in both London and Los Angeles, a movie deal was not just a possibility, it was the next logical step. 20th Century Fox, along with producer Lou Adler, saw the potential for a quirky, low-budget hit that could capture the zeitgeist. They gave director Jim Sharman a modest budget of around $1 million to translate the stage phenomenon to the silver screen. Many of the key players who created the stage magic returned, including Richard O'Brien as Riff Raff and, of course, the irreplaceable Tim Curry as Frankenfurter. However, Hollywood had its demands. The studio was adamant that the central couple, Brad and Janet, needed to be played by American actors to appeal to audiences across the pond. The casting call attracted some surprising names, including a young pre-superstardom Steve Martin, who auditioned for the straight-laced role of Brad Majors. Ultimately, the parts went to Barry Bostwick and a promising young actress named Susan Sarandon. Their on-screen chemistry was real. The two were actually dating in real life during filming. But the role everyone truly coveted was Frank. One of the biggest rock stars on the planet, Mick Jagger lobbied hard for the part, feeling it was a perfect fit for his androgynous stage persona. But the producers and creative team knew an inviolable truth. Tim Curry didn't just play Frankenfurter, he had originated him, perfected him. He was him. The part was his. To further cement the film's connection to the glam rock scene, Pierre LaRoche, the very same makeup artist who created David Bowie's iconic looks in the Ziggy Stardust era, was brought on to design the film's distinctive makeup. Filming began in the UK during a cold, bleak, and perpetually damp autumn in 1974. For the setting of Dr. Frankenfurter's castle, the production found a location that was almost too perfect. Oakley Court, a decaying Gothic mansion that was in itself a horror movie legend. This was the very same building whose creepy corridors and ominous exteriors had been the go-to location for the legendary British horror film production studio, Hammer Film Productions. It had graced the screen in classics like The Brides of Dracula and The Plague of the Zombies. The house wasn't just a set, it was a character with a sinister history. But that authenticity came at a steep price. The mansion was in a state of disrepair. There was no heating to combat the bitter English cold, and the leaky roof meant a constant, miserable drizzle often found its way indoors. For a cast spending most of their working hours dressed in little more than lingerie, corsets, and lab coats, the conditions were torturous. It got so bad that Susan Sarandon, shivering uncontrollably in her underwear for much of the shoot, contracted a severe case of pneumonia. To make matters worse, her trailer, the one place she could go to try and keep warm, caught on fire. The studio wanted to replace her, but she fiercely insisted on pushing through, delivering a full-throttle performance while visibly ill in some of the takes. The manic, joyful energy you see on screen was pure cinematic alchemy, a triumph of will over profoundly miserable physical conditions. The on-set tension even took its toll on the real-life couple. Bostwick later joked that his relationship with Sarandon couldn't survive the endless takes of the finale, where they kept painfully stepping on each other's toes while dancing in high heels. The discomfort on set was matched only by the strangeness of the production itself, a series of deceptions and bizarre truths. Take the film's iconic opening, the disembodied red lips that sing science fiction double feature. Those lips belong to Patricia Quinn, who played Magenta, but the voice you hear is none other than the creator, Richard O'Brien. Quinn, who had originated the role of the usherette on stage and famously sang that very song every night, was reportedly horrified to find out her vocals had been replaced. The same mismatch was true for the titular creation, Rocky. The perfectly sculpted actor Peter Hinwood was a model, not a singer. While he looked the part, his voice wasn't right. So his entire vocal performance, every line spoken and every note sung in The Sword of Damocles, was dubbed by a professional singer named Trevor White. The filmmakers were so concerned with the film's frantic pace that they even filmed and later cut an entire song, a sad ballad sung by Brad called Once in a While, feeling it slowed down the energy too much. Then there were the macabre legends. Just before the time warp begins, Riff Raff opens a grandfather clock to reveal a full human skeleton. According to one of the most persistent and ghoulish stories from the set, that was not a prop. It was a genuine human skeleton, supposedly rented along with the clock. The cast was reportedly quite creeped out once they learned they were acting alongside actual human remains. This gothic mood was almost amplified when the master of horror himself, Vincent Price, the original choice for the criminologist, had to decline the role, leaving the part to the wonderfully dry Charles Gray. Perhaps the most genuine moment of on-set horror, however, came during the infamous dinner scene. When the tablecloth is pulled back to reveal the mutilated, cannibalized remains of Eddie, the looks of absolute shock and visceral disgust on the actors' faces are completely real. Director Jim Sharman had kept the gory reveal a secret from the entire cast, except for Tim Curry, wanting to capture their authentic, unrehearsed reactions on camera. He succeeded. Finally, after 6 grueling and bizarre weeks, the film was in the can. The Rocky Horror Picture Show was released in the late summer of 1975, and it wasn't just a flop, it was a colossal, undeniable graveyard of a bomb. Critics were merciless, seemingly competing to see who could pan it harder. Variety dismissed it as labored campy hijinks. Newsweek famously called it tasteless, plotless, and pointless. But worse than the critics, the audiences simply didn't show up. The few who did were either offended or just profoundly confused. This weird, gender-bending rock and roll monster was too strange, too queer, too far ahead of its time. It just didn't connect. 20th Century Fox, seeing nothing but red ink and a massive write-off, quickly and quietly pulled the film from most theaters. In a last-ditch effort, they tried re-releasing it as a double bill with Brian De Palma's equally eccentric rock horror film, Phantom of the Paradise, but that failed too. The Broadway version of the show had also flopped, closing after just 45 performances. Richard O'Brien vividly remembers standing outside a hotel with Tim Curry, the dream crumbling around them. He recalled saying to him, "That's it then, isn't it? It's all over. It's been a wonderful few years." Then we went our separate ways. The show was a memory. The film was a failure, destined for the studio vault. The dream was dead, or so it seemed. In the world of 1970s cinema, long before the endless scroll of streaming services, there was a strange and sacred space, the midnight movie. It was a counterculture church, a haven for films too weird, too shocking, or too experimental for the mainstream multiplex. This was the domain of art that challenged and provoked. Films like Alejandro Jodorowsky's surreal western El Topo or John Waters' transgressive masterpiece Pink Flamingos. It was a scene, a ritual for night owls, punks, and outcasts. And it was here, in the darkness on the fringes of society, that a dead movie was about to be miraculously resurrected. The unlikely hero of this chapter is a young 20th Century Fox marketing executive named Tim Deegan. While the studio heads in their high-rise offices were ready to lock Rocky Horror in a vault and write it off as a costly mistake, Deegan noticed a strange anomaly. In Los Angeles, where the stage show had been a hit, a small but fiercely devoted group of fans kept returning to the few theaters still showing the film, some seeing it dozens of times. He pitched a radical idea, a career-risking gamble on a film everyone else had abandoned. What if they had been trying to sell the movie to the wrong people all along? What if instead of marketing it to families on a Sunday afternoon, they marketed it to the weirdos at midnight? Deegan convinced the skeptical studio to let him try. He booked the film for a midnight slot at the Waverly Theater in New York's Greenwich Village. This wasn't just any theater, it was the perfect location. In the mid-70s, Greenwich Village was the vibrant heart of the city's artistic, bohemian, and gay communities. The first screening was held on a very fitting date, April 1st, 1976, April Fool's Day. At first, it wasn't an explosion. It was a slow, magnetic pull. The theater wasn't packed, but the audience was unique. It was the same core group of 40 to 50 groovy outcasts, weirdos, and rejects, returning every single Friday and Saturday night. They weren't just watching a movie. They were making a pilgrimage, forming a community. They would get dinner together, then head to the Waverly. This small congregation had memorized every line, every lyric, every pregnant pause in the film. And soon, their silent, devoted worship was about to get very, very loud. It cannot be overstated. What happened next was a grassroots phenomenon. The studio had absolutely nothing to do with it. The entire legendary subculture surrounding Rocky Horror was not a clever marketing ploy. It was invented organically and spontaneously by the fans themselves. It evolved in phases. First, people simply began singing along to the incredibly catchy songs. Then, they began to talk back to the screen, shouting their own witty, often profane lines into the pauses of the dialogue. The exact origin of the first callback is now a piece of fan mythology, debated and celebrated for decades. One of the most famous legends credits a schoolteacher named Louis Ferrace, who on Labor Day weekend in 1976 grew so frustrated with Janet holding a newspaper over her head in the rain that he spontaneously shouted, "Buy an umbrella, you cheap b***." The theater erupted in laughter. A tradition was born. Soon others joined in, adding lines like shouting, "Where's your neck?" at the criminologist. Figures like Dory Hartley and Sal Piero, who had become known as the high priest of the fan club, helped to organize and popularize these responses until they became a full-blown, audience-written counterscript. Then came the props. Fans started bringing bags of seemingly random items from home to use at specific cues, turning the cinema into a chaotic, interactive playground. The ritual became codified. Rice was thrown during the wedding scene at the very beginning. Water pistols and newspapers were used to shield from the simulated rainstorm that strands Brad and Janet. When Frankenfurter dramatically raised his glass and proposed a toast, hundreds of slices of actual toast would fly through the air. And when Dr. Scott's arrival prompted Brad to cry, "Great Scott!" rolls of Scott brand toilet paper would be streamed across the theater like celebratory confetti. And during the creation scene, fans would snap rubber gloves in perfect time with Frank. The mess was so immense that many theaters tried to ban the throwing of food, but it was useless. The ritual was bigger than any theater manager. The ultimate evolution of this fan worship was the shadow cast. Dedicated fans began to arrive in full costume, not just to watch the movie, but to become it. They would stand in front of the screen, acting out the entire film, mimicking every gesture and lip-syncing every line in perfect time with the characters projected behind them. It created a surreal, multi-layered experience where the live performance and the celluloid film merged into one singular, chaotic event. In some cities, the local traditions became legendary, like in New Orleans, where a fan dressed as Eddie would ride a real motorcycle down the aisle during Hot Patootie. What makes this phenomenon all the more miraculous is how it spread in a pre-internet world. There was no YouTube tutorial on how to do the time warp, no viral TikTok of the best callbacks. It spread through word of mouth, through photocopied newsletters, and through fans who were apostles of the faith, traveling from one city screening to another. Sal Piero told stories of making a quip at a New York screening one weekend, then flying to Los Angeles the next and hearing his own line shouted back at the screen there. From the ashes of a spectacular box office bomb, the fans had resurrected a monster, transforming a failed movie into a thriving, living, breathing cultural institution, one toast slice at a time. The story of Rocky Horror's Rebirth is not just about a movie finding an audience. It's about an audience finding a home. As the midnight screenings became a weekly ritual, something profound was happening. For countless people, it was a baptism into weird culture. For shy, insecure teens, it was a revelation. As one fan, writer Ethan Gilsdorf, recalled of his first time, "These weirdos are my people," I realized. I felt at home. This was a common experience. In a world that often demanded conformity, Rocky Horror celebrated deviance. For many in the LGBTQ+ community, the midnight screening was more than just a haven. It was a vital first step into a larger world. In a time before mainstream acceptance or the internet, it was often the very first opportunity for queer teens to socialize with their peers at an event where their identity wasn't just tolerated, but was the main event. The theater became a sanctuary, a place where, for 2 hours, you were not the outsider. In fact, the straight-laced conventional couple, Brad and Janet, were the real freaks. For many, this weekly pilgrimage was a lifeline. People have said, quite seriously, that this movie saved their lives. At the heart of this profound connection was the film's central mantra, "Don't dream it, be it." This wasn't just a lyric in a song. It became a declaration of independence. It was a jolt of inspiration, a kick of outrageous self-confidence channeled directly from Tim Curry's electrifying performance. It was permission to be more outgoing, to be weird, to be brave, to fly your own freak flag a little higher. The audience took that message to heart, and in doing so, they gave the film a purpose its creators could have never imagined.
Rocky! Janet!
Dr. Scott!
Janet! Rocky!
But a legacy, especially one that lasts for 50 years, is rarely simple. As time has passed, our understanding of the film has evolved. What was seen as purely liberating in 1975 is now viewed through a more critical, modern lens. The very things that made Rocky Horror feel dangerous and subversive then can also make it feel deeply problematic today. The most significant reevaluation concerns Frankenfurter himself. His bedroom encounters with Brad and Janet, where he takes both of their virginities by impersonating their partners, are central to the plot. While played for campy, comedic effect, many modern viewers interpret these scenes not as seduction, but as sexual assault by deception. This reading suggests the film perpetuates a troubling and outdated trope of the predatory queer character. He is a figure who, at various points in the film, fits nearly every historical problematic portrayal of a trans character: a villain, a victim, an object of ridicule, and an object of lust. The language of the film has also aged in complicated ways. The song Sweet Transvestite is an anthem of self-realization, yet the word transvestite is now considered offensive by many. Frank is from the planet transsexual in the galaxy of Transylvania. In the 70s, these terms were part of the lexicon, but today they are seen as insensitive, conflating gender identity with cross-dressing and science fiction villainy. Richard O'Brien, who himself identifies as third gender, has added to the complexity with more recent controversial comments about transgender women that have troubled many fans. And looking past the celebration reveals a genuinely dark heart to the story. Some have argued the film is both an appraisal and a warning about queer culture itself, celebrating liberation while cautioning against a hedonism so extreme that it becomes destructive. Frank is not just a lovable rogue. He is a manipulative, murderous villain. He doesn't just kill Eddie. He commits one of the most horrifying acts imaginable, harvesting a portion of his former lover's brain to create a better lover in Rocky. He then serves the rest of Eddie to his unsuspecting guests. It is, as one commenter put it, some dark shit. He holds Columbia in a state of implied sexual slavery. Frank was never intended to be a role model. He is a charismatic, captivating, and ultimately tragic figure who, in the end, definitively loses. So how do we reconcile these two realities? How can a film be both a life-saving sanctuary and a problematic text filled with murder and manipulation? The answer is that it is, and has always been, both. The film's nominal framing device, that this is all just a sci-fi double feature, a tale of science gone wrong, allows for this moral ambiguity. But the true answer is more complex. The Rocky Horror Picture Show is a product of its specific, chaotic time, a pre-HIV, pre-mainstream gay rights world where queer representation of any kind was revolutionary. Its goal was never to present a perfect, politically correct utopia. Its message was simply to tell people who felt different that it was okay to be different, and that they weren't alone. It is a messy, contradictory, beautiful, and sometimes ugly masterpiece. And despite all the valid critiques, the undeniable, enduring feeling the film leaves you with is one of joy. The music is irresistible, the energy is infectious, the premise is ridiculous, and for decades it was simply a good time had by all. Its power lies not in its perfection, but in its ability to hold all of these truths at once. The film's own flawed narrative was ultimately less important than the community that grew around it, a community that took its most powerful message of self-creation and quite literally brought it to life. After 50 years, the phenomenon of the Rocky Horror Picture Show is no longer just a cult, it's an institution. The numbers are staggering. A film made for roughly $1 million has gone on to gross over $170 million worldwide. It holds the official Guinness World Record for the longest-running theatrical release in film history, a title it will likely never relinquish. This isn't because of a studio policy, it's because audiences have simply refused to let it go. In Munich, Germany, the Museum Lichtspiele Cinema has screened the film weekly since 1977, even offering pre-packaged RHPS kits with all the necessary props. In Portland, Oregon, the Clinton Street Theater has screened it every week since 1978. Even in places like South Africa, where it was briefly banned, it still managed to build a massive following. For generations, it has been a rite of passage, a place where veterans initiate virgins into the glorious, chaotic ritual. As the decades passed, what was once a fringe subculture began to bleed into the mainstream, though not always successfully. In 1981, Richard O'Brien attempted to catch lightning in a bottle a second time with shock treatment. The film was originally conceived as a direct sequel, but after Tim Curry refused to reprise his iconic role, the project was radically retooled. Compounded by an actors' strike that forced the production to be shot entirely inside a UK studio, the resulting film was a bizarre, contained satire of reality television, years before the genre even existed. Without Curry and the familiar Gothic setting, it failed to connect and bombed completely. While the world forgot it, the dedicated fanbase adopted it, famously declaring it not a sequel, not a prequel, but an equal. The true markers of mainstream acceptance came later. In 2010, the hit TV show Glee dedicated an entire episode to Rocky Horror, introducing its songs to a new generation. Then, in 2016, Fox produced a made-for-TV remake starring transgender actress Laverne Cox as Frankenfurter. While many fans felt this glossy, safer, more politically correct version lacked the dangerous, subversive edge of the original, its very existence was proof. Rocky Horror was no longer just for the Misfits at midnight. It was a certified piece of pop culture history. Interestingly, as the film became more popular, some longtime fans noted a change in the very nature of the audience participation. The original screenings in the 70s were described as a group activity, a unified chorus with established leaders. By the 80s, it had shifted to a more individualistic, look-at-me culture, with people competing to shout the newest, cleverest line. By the 90s, it had become more disjointed, with people yelling over each other, perhaps reflecting a broader societal shift. Then came the final, most surreal chapter in the film's 50-year saga. In 2019, the Walt Disney Company finalized its acquisition of 20th Century Fox. Suddenly, Dr. Frankenfurter, the sweet transvestite, the murderer, the cannibal, the pansexual icon from the planet Transsexual, was a Disney property. The fan community reacted with a mix of horror and hilarity. The joke spread like wildfire. Does this make Tim Curry a Disney princess? But beneath the jokes was a very real fear. Larry Wiesel, the president of the official fan club, noted that while the community had survived existential threats before, the rise of VHS, then DVD, then the TV remake, the Disney acquisition was the first time he was truly worried. Disney is famous for protecting its family-friendly brand and locking older titles away in the Disney Vault. Fans were terrified that the company would kill the tradition, shutting down the midnight screenings and fan events for good. And then, the strangest thing happened. Disney did nothing. In an unprecedented move, the company seemed to recognize that they hadn't just bought a film, they had inherited a living, breathing cultural ecosystem. While other cult Fox titles were pulled from circulation, Disney has allowed the midnight repertory screenings of Rocky Horror to continue. They have allowed the shadowcasts, the fan merchandise, and the entire chaotic ritual to flourish. The monster that the fans had created was simply too powerful, too beloved, and too strange for even the House of Mouse to control. As Wiesel put it, Rocky Horror is its own living, breathing monster, and he's wreaking havoc, like the fans do. So why? After 50 years of seismic cultural shifts, why does this messy, imperfect, low-budget film endure? Perhaps the secret is in its very flaws. Richard O'Brien once recalled a fan thanking him for leaving spaces in the dialogue for the audience to respond. That wasn't the intention. It was a result of wobbly direction. But those flaws became the canvas for the audience's own creativity. Perhaps it's the film's unique brand of inclusivity. While other cult films of the era were often abrasive and antagonistic towards the mainstream, Rocky Horror, as one writer put it, simply threw open his cape and asked people of every gender and sexual preference to loosen up a bit. Its central message wasn't one of anger, but of pleasure. Ultimately, the journey of the Rocky Horror Picture Show is a testament to the most powerful force in all of cinema, the audience. It is the story of a film that failed by every traditional metric, only to be rescued from a studio vault by a community of outcasts who saw themselves on screen. They didn't just watch it, they lived it, they breathed it, and they rewrote it. They took a piece of celluloid and turned it into a home. After 50 years, the film's greatest legacy is the undeniable proof that a movie doesn't truly belong to the studio that made it. It belongs to the people who love it. If you discovered something new today, give your absolute pleasure to that like button and subscribe to Golden Flicker so you never miss another story from behind the Hollywood curtain. What does the Rocky Horror Picture Show mean to you? What's your favorite memory or callback? Let us know in the comments below.